Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a very cold and very small Cafe Scientifique. This month's cafe, of course, which you all know about, is Virtual Reality, the 30-year-old emerging technology. Before I hand the mic over to our lovely speaker, I'll just run through a couple of things that are coming up. So first of all, this Saturday is a wiki editathon at Auckland Museum. If you are free and interested in helping fill some of the stories, particularly this weekend's focus is on creating more pages that talk about the contributions of women, because women make up something like 70% of all Wikipedia articles. So they're currently working on that. So if you want to get involved, the details are on. Well, they're on Wikipedia, literally, but also on the Auckland Museum website, and I think there's something up on the museum's Facebook as well. Also this weekend is the CTANS conference, the Costume Textile Association of New Zealand. That's running Friday to Sunday at AUT. CTANS is, of course, one of the sections of the Auckland Museum Institute, so they're part of us, even though at the moment their executives are all based in Dunedin. Two of our institute members presenting this weekend, Linda, Tyler, and myself, and one of the applied arts curators from Auckland Museum is also presenting Grace Live. Another thing of interest is the 2020 issue, volume number 55 of the Records of Auckland Museum is now available online. You can check that out. There's 7 lovely articles, and a link is going up on our Facebook page any moment now, but you can just look for it on the Auckland Museum website. They're all available online, or you can download the whole issue as a PDF. And the last thing that I was going to mention, the squidologist, Associate Professor Kat Bolstead, who presented here 2 years ago, received a new specimen today that has been live tweeting pictures of the dissection. It's a non-frozen deep sea squid, which is very exciting. So there's some things they're able to do on that they can't do on the frozen ones. And so she's told us to all check out the pictures as she tweets them. So check that out online. I think her handle is ALCES, A-E-L-C-E-S for the, I can't remember what it all stands for, but the C is for cephalopods. Excellent. Right, I won't bother reading out the blurb or anything of our speaker, because I assume you'll read it already. So I'll just hand over to the magnificent Dr. Roy Davies, who is very kindly doing this, even though originally we were supposed to do it last year and it had to be moved due to COVID. So if you can all just...
Was this time last year?
Yeah, so if you can just bring your hands together to welcome our speaker.
Thank you, Scott, and hello to this very select group. The good thing about a select group like this is that we do have some things to try, so we may even have an opportunity to try them. So I have been working in this area called virtual reality for a while. I've got some slides up here which I will show, but they're also printed out on these pages here for some of them only. So if you can't see, if you're going to go quick in your neck, well, let's look around. I call this something. I've got a bit of a technology problem here with my little mouse thing. So it's always a bit fraught when you try and talk about technology. Things don't always work as you expect them to. So I've been working with virtuality for about 25 years. That's why I call the talk this sort of 30-year-old emerging technology. So when people think of virtual reality, they think of, this must be something new and exciting. But that there was the first virtual reality environment I made in the late 90s, and it was for teaching people with brain injury how to brew coffee. So you had a traumatic brain injury and you want to relearn how to do daily tasks. And so we used virtual reality in those days to do that. And this was using a Pentium Pro 200 megahertz PC. So things have sort of changed a little bit since then.
Why coffee?
Why coffee? Well, this is Sweden. By the way, that over there is my wife, for those who don't know.
Yeah,
she's the heckler. So. In Sweden, of course, brewing coffee or drinking coffee is like a major pastime. And one of the things I learned about this particular virtual environment, two things. I didn't learn so much about virtuality, I learned about Swedish coffee habits. First of all, there's one brand of coffee that you have in southern Sweden that's called Soega's coffee. I had something else there which I found on the shelf. And it was apparently completely wrong. The second thing, Swedish coffee is opaque. It's not transparent, it's thick, dark, and opaque, so you shouldn't be able to see through it. So I kind of learned some interesting things there. Before we go into that sort of space there, this is what people think of today as a virtual reality system. So this is called a head-mounted display. And I've actually got some stuff running in here which you can try later. What's sort of in here is not so much different from, say, something like this, which is considerably older, which is a stereoscope. And here you've got two pictures, you can kind of see it there, and again, you can try these afterwards. And you've got a couple of lenses at the front. And the point is that you look through here and you can see a stereoscopic image. So you can you find yourself immersed in that environment. The same thing with this device here. The only difference is that it's electronic. If you can see in there, it's got a couple of lenses inside. Okay? And instead of having a picture, we've got a computer at the back here. Essentially, it's like a mobile phone that's stuck inside a headset. It also has a couple of other clever bits and pieces, which is it's got cameras around the outside, so it can see what I'm looking at, and it can detect what I'm looking at, and make sort of adjustments to what it is that you see, so you feel that you believe you're right. We'll come back to that in a moment, though. By the way, we're such a small group. If you've got any questions, just sort of raise your hand or ask as we go.
Do you already have the goggles and the glass taken?
No. The virtuality we had then was strictly just on a screen.
So it's still considered virtuality.
Yeah, we call it virtual reality. I mean, nowadays you'd call it interactive 3D, maybe, I suppose. But, you know, the borderline between 3D games, sort of screen virtuality, and then what we call here virtuality is normal reality. So, gone too far now. I'll get the technology to work. Okay. So over the years, I've been using virtuality for many different things. Everything from brewing coffee, town planning, all the way through to historical projects, even medical surgical training, driving simulators. So this kind of technology has been around and being used for a lot of things. One of the oldest forms of virtuality is flight simulators. So, you know, you're in a plane, you think you're in a plane, you believe you're in a plane, and it's just like being in a real plane, and you can fly and you can learn. And the most important thing there is that you can then transfer that knowledge into the real world. So it's got a good history, if you like. Now, I'd like to talk about why we use technology. And technology, even like this, has a purpose. It's a tool. It's a thing that we use to augment our abilities. So a hammer is a classic tool, if you like, that we use to give us abilities that we don't have otherwise. And this is something that's evolved over many generations, if you like, to this fine form that it is today. I mean, if you gave somebody a hammer who had never seen one, they'd probably have a fair idea that you grab hold of this bit because it kind of feels like something you can get hold of. And it's got a heavy bit on it, so you probably get the idea that, yeah, I can hit stuff with that, you know. And that's what we call affordance. It kind of affords a certain natural interaction. I'm not quite sure people would get what the pointed sort of prongy bits are for, unless you showed them a nail. Then they might get the idea, oh, okay, so I could use that to lever out a nail. When we're designing technology, we have to bear this into mind. We have to think about how do we design technology that's as easy to use and as easy to understand as a hammer. And speaking of difficult technology, let's see. Here we go. So we use technologies to advance or to help us with all sorts of things. But nowadays, We have technologies that enhance our intellectual abilities, like Google or Wikipedia. We have technologies that help us with sensory abilities, like glasses, hearing aids. And we have technologies that help us with things like playing music, electronic organs, things like that. So I can play reasonably well a tune, even though I have almost no musical ability, because there's a technology that can help me do that.
Some technologies are better helpers than others, aren't they?
They certainly are.
Very good.
Now, we often talk about, you may have heard the terms virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, and even something called cross reality. These are all different technologies that are used for different purposes. So this is virtual reality, where you're fully encased in a space. You put these glasses on and you can't see anything else apart from the virtual space. But you also have things like augmented reality, which I don't have any examples of today. But typically you're looking through a phone, through the camera, and then you might see something else popping out of the world, if you like, in the real world. And that's often used in training environments. So that's augmented reality. Mixed reality is kind of a combination of those, and cross reality is another term for mixed reality in some sense, where you can interact with the real world and the physical world at the same time. But I don't want to get too much into the technology side of things. I want to talk about what this is for, because I think that's probably the most interesting thing. Because it's been around a while, and people have been using it for quite a while, and there's a whole lot of interesting applications. So, let me just turn this thing off. It's actually causing more problems than that. Excuse me.
Did you get your exercise?
Well, I am. Don't worry, the video is an optional actually.
Oh, here we go.
So one of the terms that we use with virtuality is the word presence, feeling of being there. And it's kind of the central concept for how we understand the way virtuality works. In other words, when you put on this headset and you ask somebody, where are you? They'll describe their environment they're in. They believe they're in that space. If you ask them, yes, but where are you? They say, well, I'm standing in this room under different space. So you know that you're not kind of really there, but you can certainly believe that you're in a different space. And that is such a strong feeling that we've got a virtual reality environment where you go up 40 stories in the air and you come out of a lift and there's a plank in front of you. And walking out across that plank is very hard. You know, you believe, and you know you're safe because you know you remember where you were. But you look down and you know you've got the stereoscopic view. You can sort of look down and you can sort of see, oh, we can put that one on there and try it. And actually walking across it, and even for me, somebody who's been in these environments for a long time, the feeling is so compelling that it's very hard to get over. There's a virtuality game studio in Parnell area, and they've got these sort of interesting games that you can play. There's one there where you can run around and shoot people, so typical thing you can do in those places. And again, there was this sort of grill, virtual grill over sort of a seascape, and you could theoretically run across it quite safely, but I could not bring myself to go there. I just couldn't do it. You know, that feeling was so strong because you were so well in that space. The presence feeling is very strong. And this is what we use, this is what we kind of play on in order to bring out the benefits of what this technology is for.
Just a quick question on
Yes.
the bottom right photo. The retail mirror, isn't that more AR than VR?
Yes, so actually a lot of these pictures are more augmented reality. I don't want to get too much into the retail there, but yes. This is more augmented reality, and these are actually kind of composite images which show people using augmented reality who are seeing objects in real space. I don't want to get too stuck on technology at this level. What what I thought we'd do is I'd explore some of the feelings that presence gives you and talk about some of the examples of technologies that have been, or applications that have been developed for this. So one of the biggest things that virtuality, that being in a virtual space gives you, is a feeling of understanding and learning. You can really easily learn stuff. So I've talked about flight simulators before. That's one of the earliest ones where they can really prove that people who have trained in a flight simulator are at least no worse than if they're trained in the real world. And that's an important distinction, because you want people who are trained in a flight simulator to at least be able to fly a plane as well as if they've done it in the real training. The same thing with medical training. So you want your surgeon who's trained in keyhole surgery, for example, to be able to operate in the real world as if they'd done the traditional training. And that has been proven with many good examples. So you can be sure that if the surgeon says, well, maybe you should be a little bit worried if your surgeon says, oh, I've only trained on virtual patients. Maybe you could be a little bit worried. Because I've trained on virtual patients, and I think I've killed about 5 virtual patients trying to put a little wire up in the heart, trying to sort of clean out the arteries and things. So it's actually quite difficult. The interesting thing about medical training is that the environments are so realistic, and you have what is called haptic feedback as well, so it feels the same as if you're doing true surgery, that if a virtual patient dies, the doctors and the nurses feel the same feeling of regret, if you like, at least for a moment anyway, because it is so real. You actually go into the operating theatre, you gown up, you do everything you would do in a real theatre, and then you operate on the virtual patient. So it sets the scene, if you like. But of course, if they don't survive, you do feel that pang. You also have things like training for using complex machinery. So one of the good things about training in virtual reality is you don't hurt yourself. So you can train in complex and dangerous environments, and you can train in difficult situations or dangerous situations, and if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. You can do it again, because you won't hurt yourself. If you're training a real crane operator and you make a mistake, that will be a serious problem.
But Roy, what about kids learning to cross the road and deliberately getting themselves killed?
What's that one?
I remember you were teaching kids with intellectual.
Well, yes, there is a certain. Okay. Sorry, I excuse the heckler on the side. So training children with learning difficulties, and daily tasks, things like going shopping, crossing the road, and so on. What Annette was alluding to was a situation where we were training these kids, the different sort of processes. But children being children, they figured it was much more fun to run out on the road and get hit by the car, because there's a very interesting dynamic effect on the blood and things like that, And kids being kids, that's what they did. So what we had to do there is we had to make it a negative experience, not what we thought was a negative experience. There was sort of blood and gore and stuff, but for them, just the virtuality turning off. If you got hit by a car, it would just turn off. And that was kind of like a significantly negative experience for them. So yeah, there's interesting complications with that. This one here, this is actually showing an aircraft pilot learning with virtuality. But I've also seen air traffic controllers. So you can imagine a complete physical board, just like a real air traffic controller, but all the screens are, well, they're screens, they're not windows. And again, you can train those situations. But what's really kind of bizarre, because you go in there and it's right, yeah, so the planes and things, and then somebody presses the button, and all the planes fly backwards and they sort of go back to where they were going, and things like that. And it's kind of slightly bizarre, but very interesting. But again, you can train those difficult situations in a very truly realistic way that you can't do in reality. So certainly you can't train those complex, difficult situations and give the people the opportunity to get it wrong. Obviously, military training and driver training. Now, I've also talked about how virtuality can induce fear. So we talked about going across the plank. But it's also been used to help people combat fear. So fear of spiders, arachnophobia, fear of speaking to large audiences, spiders speaking to small ones. So this one here, this was actually an experiment where they were actually measuring people's sort of bodily responses to this going out across the plank. And what you're seeing here is kind of honest. This one here, this is actually a very strong, a very powerful training technique to get you to allay your fears of spiders, or talking in front of people, or going for a job interview. There's a whole range of them that have been done over the years. But also, people use it, I don't know if any of you been to Disney, but if you go to Disney, of course, they use Virtuality to give you a roller coaster ride. That feels real, even though you've just got a headset on. Because you're going up and down, and these things here, they move up and down as well. So they're not literally moving around on a natural roller coaster, but what you're seeing, and you believe it because it's moving, it's a multi-sensory experience. But also, maybe it can be used to help people not be afraid of going to the dentist. So it can give them something to distract them from that process. So I'd say this is one of the strongest things that virtuality is used for. What time do we talk to? Do you have a break in the middle?
Yeah, keep going.
Right. So because you're so much in the space, you can also feel what it's like to be somebody else. Now I remember one of the first times I experienced this, there was a woman who had been a really great photographer. And then she had a car accident and had a brain injury. And she made this virtuality experience, which was really about how the world felt to her now. Because what it did is it kind of fragmented her senses. She was no longer able to see things the same way or experience things the same way. But when somebody says that, you think, oh yeah, okay. But when you kind of see it through her eyes, you start to think, oh my goodness. You kind of felt very sad because what she'd lost was quite dramatic. So you get a great feeling of empathy. You can have, for example, learn what it's like to be in a wheelchair. And I remember seeing some virtual environments where not only were they learning what it's like to be in a wheelchair, but what it's like to be somebody in a wheelchair who's maybe had a stroke. And so there's certain things that are very hard to do deliberately in that virtual environment, just as it would be for somebody who had a stroke. And as a nurse, being able to understand that is very important. It gives you that feeling of empathy. More recently, on this device here, one of the really great things about this is that it has an app store. And you sort of wonder, you've all got mobile phones, right? So you used to go to an app store. You now have an app store inside this. And that means that anybody around the world can make content and share experiences on this. And you can download it. You can pay $5 or something, and you can download it. And there's one that I downloaded some time ago called Notes on Blindness. And you think, okay, that's kind of a weird thing to have inside a virtual reality environment, which is primarily a visual medium. But what it was this guy who had, as he was going blind, he'd done recordings of how his perception of the world changed. And also when he was fully blind, how his other senses grew around that and what sound meant for him. And then they created a virtual reality environment like this, where it's mostly black, but wherever there was sound, you sort of get this little light sort of coming up. And so when you hear the rain, you can sort of hear the pitter-patter of rain, and then you can see it as it's sort of hitting things. And again, it's very, very powerful because both his story, the words that he was using, so it was a great storytelling, but also just the experience of it. You could actually just close your eyes, you didn't really need to have the visual part, but you could hear it. So it was truly an audible experience, a surround audible experience. Very, very powerful. And then this one here, so apparently a lot of refugees, they keep the key to their house that they left. That was iconic. And so this was a story done by some refugees about being a refugee, what it's like to go through that process of being torn from your place, going through this sort of whole complex process of coming into a new country. But the way they did it was not, it was very artistic. So it was using the medium in a way that it was almost like a computer game, but it was done in such a clever way that you felt the frustrations because you were trying to do things and they wouldn't happen. And then there were people these creatures coming at you, garbling stuff at you in languages you couldn't understand. And it was just, it was really quite amazing. And then, over time, it became more clear and you could sort of see and you could sort of come to this new world. And again, so using a tool like this, and where you're completely immersed, you spend half an hour, and you come out of it and you're sort of like, it's just, it just makes you sort of think. So, empathy, yes, but also storytelling, very powerful. Of course, excitement is something that virtuality gives you. You can climb Mount Everest, if you wish. I can climb Mount Everest, and I'm asthmatic, but I can still climb Mount Everest, and I don't have to worry about breathing, because I can do it in virtual reality. And it'll be very exciting, because it'll be, you have these devices here, which you hold onto, and you literally have to climb, as you would, and if you make a mistake, it's a long way down. So, you get that same sort of feeling. And there's a ladder over there, you've got to swing over, you've got to grab the ladder, and so on. So it's very, very much like being in that feels like, as far as I know, I've never climbed that ladder. So it's very much like what I believe it would be like. Roller coasters, of course, being able to go on virtual roller coasters. One of the usual environments that we put people in when we show off virtuality is a roller coaster. Because we're meat, I suppose. It's not what I've got on today. I've got a more sort of a sublime environment for you to experience. But when you put people in the roller coaster, I was thinking it would attest. She's a very good virtual reality traveller, and is nauseous even though I'm playing 3D computer games without virtuality. So in a virtuality environment, you really can get that sort of up, down, and around and about. What's very interesting in the latest versions is that when you experience motion in the real world, there's sensors in your eyes, and around about here, which you can't really see, but they sense motion. So if you kind of close off that part of the visual sphere, in the virtual space you put on a virtual helmet, it kind of closes off that part of the visual area, then you don't get the same feeling of nausea. And the nausea you get because in the virtual space, you're moving very fast and going all over the place, but your body's sitting still. And so your balance organs in your ears are still, but what you're seeing is moving. But if you close off this visual side piece, you feel a lot less nauseous. So, however, that's a slight digression, I suppose. But it's certainly very good for, I think some of the first virtuality games were either roller coasters or driving environments. Now, the bottom right one is very interesting. Good question. So that's the guy who's been experimenting with virtual smell. So you can make virtual smell, aromas, things like that. It's been around for a while, but it's not commercially available. So you can have a virtual reality environment, for example, for training firefighters, where one of the important things about firefighters is being able to recognize the smell of what's burning, so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, if you like. This one here, he was doing some experiments which was combining smell and taste, and using virtual smells with the same object to eat, and convincing people they were eating different things because of the smell. So it was a very, very interesting experiment. I don't know if virtual smell devices are going to be commercially available anytime soon, but it has its possibilities. And then, of course, virtual reality for buying a brand new car. You're really excited about that. You can go to this showroom, you can buy a Lamborghini, whatever it might be, and you can design it in virtuality first. See what it's going to look like, go and drive one of the other ones that's there, see what it feels like, but then it'll be delivered to your door, if you've got that sort of thing. So these technologies, I would normally ask, so how many of you play Pokemon Go? But I suspect you may not one. So when we think about virtual technologies, augmented reality, for example, people often think of Pokemon Go as an augmented reality technology. It is kind of, because you're getting out into the real world and things are changing around you as you go around. You can hunt these Pokemon. So that's one of the sort of the fun things you can do with these sorts of technologies. But at the same time, it's also being used in the film industry. So when they filmed The Mandalorian, instead of using blue screen or green screen, they actually used big displays behind. And the cameras, the real cameras, have the same sorts of tracking technology as these devices use, but on a grander scale, so that they didn't need to splice things together afterwards. It was all filmed in one shot. And it was as if, from the camera's point of view, it was as if you were in a real space environment, if you like, in that case. So this just shows how some of these technologies have come from this sort of space and gone over into other areas, like, in this case, film industry, and of course into the gaming industry as well. These two are what we call augmented reality. And these are kind of composite images, because what they're wearing here is something called a Hololens, which looks a bit like this, only you can see through it. So I could be looking at you in a couple of class sandwich amazes and talk about last time, something like that. Or I might see behind you, it might be a zombie, just really. So again, there's all sorts of things you can do with these augmented reality technologies. I don't have one to show, unfortunately, today, but it's used a lot in training environments. So I might be trying to fix something in a factory, and I can look down and I can see sort of around the area that I'm working, all the information I need to be able to fix that. Or I might be looking at a patient, and I can see all the information around related to that patient's condition, maybe the scans are overlaid, or something like that, in augmented reality. The video would have come up but didn't work. I had an example of showing how it actually works. Any more questions so far? Shall I just plow on? Yeah. There's only about 3 or 4 more slides. Now, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, normally what we do is after the talk, we have a break and then we have questions.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's so clear, correct. So this is an area I think is really interesting, because when you're in, as I said before, when you're in the virtual space, you are in that somewhere else, but that is so strong, you can be distracted from the real world. And these are all examples of people who are being distracted from the real world. For example, when this guy's having burn treatment. And the virtual reality that he's being shown is a cold, icy environment. And it's got things happening in it, and so he's concentrating on that. But the fact that it's a cold environment actually kind of works against the pain that he's feeling from the burn treatment. And very interesting experiments have been done around that to show that if you like, the measured experience of pain, in other words, what they report as the level of pain, is significantly reduced through this sort of process. So, wow, I mean, that's really amazing. But this guy over here, he just doesn't like having an injection. And so he's walking along in this virtual space and he brushes against a thorny bush and, oh! But, you know, he wasn't screaming and kicking his arms around. so on. So, from the nurse's point of view, that's actually quite useful. So he's been usefully distracted. Likewise with the dentist. Again, you're completely distracted. I don't know quite how you'll move that over your mouth. If you're sort of busy doing something else in the virtual space, it'd be easy to forget. Or even if you're just lying in bed and you've got to be there for a long time. Virtual reality can offer a way to, an escape if you like, more interesting than television perhaps. But then this one here, I think this is very kind of unique, I suppose. This is where we use virtual reality to distort the movements that you normally make to encourage you to make certain types of movements. And why do you want to do that? Well, if you had a stroke and you've got to train your arm to move a certain way, then we can use virtual reality and games to make it more exciting, more interesting. But you can only progress in the game if you move the arm as your occupational therapist has said you need to move it. So, and maybe just a little bit more. So again, it's one of these things where, yes, you could just sort of get people to do the exercises, but put them in a virtual reality environment, and it makes it much more compelling, much more, you're more likely to do it because it's fun, it's exciting.
Roy, what about people who find wearing headsets very uncomfortable? They get heavy, other alternatives?
Well, when we were doing virtual reality for people with brain injury, we didn't have headsets. We didn't have headsets. If we had headsets, we wouldn't have used them. Because putting a headset on somebody who just had a brain injury is probably through a traumatic accident or something, probably wasn't a good idea. They've come a long way, so this is actually quite light compared to the sorts of things we used to have. It used to be so heavy, you had to have kind of like a sort of like a boom coming over the top to sort of hold it and make sure it didn't sort of load your head down too far. But I think what Annette's alluding to also is there are also big screen systems, but they're not so popular anymore because if I was to set up a big screen system here, it would be very difficult because I have 3 projectors and big screens and so on. But if I have one of these, I can just carry it in my case. It's much easier to use. I should just on that note, on that point though, this is kind of the latest technology. And I got one of these maybe 6 months ago. No, actually longer than that, just before the first lockdown. By the way, they were very hard to come by around about the first lockdown time. Which is great. Yeah, exactly. And because I've been in this space for a long time, I was very skeptical as to how well it would work. I thought, and then I put it on and thought, actually this is pretty good. So for somebody to say that, for me to say that, I think it's quite unusual. The systems that we used to have were more the big screen systems, but that's more in the laboratories and so on. This is consumer technology, $400 or so, and you can have one of these yourself. You can get more expensive ones. This one doesn't need anything else, just that, the controllers. You don't need a computer. I mean, the computer's in here, if you like. Whereas there's other ones you can buy where you get the headset, that's great, but then you need a $2,000 computer as well. And yes, they're much better quality graphics. It's like comparing a mobile phone to a computer. But that's pretty good. And for $300, it makes it worthwhile. But one of the interesting things I did find with during the lockdown period was people using virtual reality for virtual companionship. So there's a virtual reality environment where you can go and watch the movies with somebody, in fact, with a whole group of people. And it's real time, it's live. You go there, you buy your tickets, the movie's going to show at a certain time, you show up at that time, and you go into a virtual movie theatre, and you take your seat, and you watch the movie. And you can buy virtual popcorn and throw it around, you can throw virtual tomatoes, but it won't be told you if you make noise, because I did that. I went into one of these sort of free ones, I went and I just started talking, and it was like, shh, shh, just like in a real movie theatre. But it just sort of just shows that, you can use this for all sorts of things. Now, we have Zoom today, you have these Zoom meetings. If everybody had a headset like this, you could have Zoom meetings in virtual reality. And it's becoming possible. It is possible now. It's just that not everybody has one of those, so you can't sort of just do it. But it will become more common, and it will be, especially maybe against the younger generation, younger than us, younger than me, I guess. This is normal stuff for them, and they would think, yeah, okay, I can go somewhere. When they're going somewhere in a virtual space. They're hanging out with their friends in this virtual space, and these friends are from all over the world.
Do they see avatars, or are you wearing it on?
It can vary. So this one here, there's pictures of these ones in there as well. This one here is where they actually try and get a picture of your face on what is called an avatar, so kind of like a virtual you. And if you get that right, it looks good. If you get that not quite right, it looks really bizarre because your face is sort of sketched out forward slightly. More often than not, you might end up looking something like this. But that's not the point. You don't need to look like you. In fact, you don't necessarily know what other people look like at all. But you're interacting with other people in real time, across the world, across the internet, but in this shared space. Again, because you're there, and they're there, and you're sitting around the virtual fireplace, whatever, you talk to people. And it's hard to describe, it's bizarre, but it feels real, right? And until you try it, it's very hard to kind of sort of get over what it's sort of in part what it's like. But also you have esports. So this is also where people take it to the next level, where they have competition and they fight it out in the virtual space. Or in this case, yeah, literally. I mean, these guys are on the stage competing. Now, esports is actually one of the biggest sports, I would say, arenas, if you like, in the world. Bigger than things like rugby and so on. It's actually really, really popular. Not all with virtuality, quite often it's just sort of on a movie screen. Very popular. Now, I did mention nausea before as well. But what's interesting here also is there's some people who have used this effect to help train people who are very sensitive to motion sickness. So you can use virtuality to help people overcome that in much the same way as you do. So it's kind of like, you just get used to it over time. And so I think it might even be a New Zealand company, I'm not sure. But so even if going on a ferry makes you feel sick, you can use virtuality to help even things out, but at the same time also give you just enough feeling of motion so that you get used to it over time. I do actually have a bucket that looks exactly like this. I've got to bring it there. And as I mentioned, when you do a roller coaster, that's definitely one where your stomach definitely hurts. It's not a good thing to do after dinner. So I do that one today. I think this is the last one. I call this one exhaustion. I was trying to think of what's the feeling that you get when you exercise. Virtuality for exercise is a very powerful area. So you can run on a treadmill, you can cycle on a cycle for an hour, but it's not very exciting. Put on a VR headset and you're cycling in a group, or you're cycling alongside a very interesting trail, or you're cycling alongside a famous cyclist and you're comparing yourself to how they do in the real world. So these are all possibilities that virtuality gives you. It means, therefore, that you're more compelled, if you like, to carry on doing it, rather than sort of say, oh, this is boring, I just want to give up. Because you want to find what happens next. You want to see if you can beat your friends, all sorts of things like that. There's all sorts of different things you can do in virtual space. You can play with cricket, I think. I've also seen virtual golf. You can swim in a virtual reality environment. You can, I wasn't quite sure what this one is. I think this is a general fitness training thing, sort of simulating skydiving, but you're actually getting, it's moving all around, and so it's exercising all those muscles. You can play any number of different kinds of games, and actually, really practice. Or of course, So I think really that's, yeah. That should be fine. Or do after the break, I'll see if I can get the videos going during the break. Then we'll see how it goes. So,
All right, so if we'd like to just bring our hands together and thank our speaker. Right, so then